Rosalynn Carter made an impact on the political world, and at this hour, politicians, including many on both sides of the aisle, they are reacting to her death. Former President Barack Obama wrote on X, formerly Twitter, Rosalynn Carter's life is a reminder that no matter who we are, our legacies are best measured not in awards or accolades, but in the lives we touched. And former President Bill Clinton wrote, Rosalynn Carter was a compassionate and committed champion of human dignity everywhere. Republicans, including former President Donald Trump, also sharing their thoughts. Trump posted online that Carter was a devoted First Lady, and former President George W. Bush posted there was no greater advocate of President Carter.
And